Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor.
Four person? If you would stand and read your verdict, please.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder as charged in count 1 of the indictment. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder as charged in count 2 of the indictment. And we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of convicted felon in possession of a firearm as charged in count 3 of the indictment.
Thank you.
I mean, that was kind of obvious when you look at this. So the real question is, did the state ultimately prove their case? Here's some highlights from closing arguments.
What's required for first-degree murder is, 1, that the defendant unlawfully killed the victim. The only way to lawfully kill someone is if you are in protection of yourself or others. Second, you have to prove that this defendant acted intentionally. Intentionally means that there was no mistake, there was no accident. Third, you have to prove that the killing was premeditated. And as we saw, or as we learned in Ward Dyer last week, premeditation does not mean that you had to have this planned for months, weeks, or days in advance. It could just mean that you simply stepped out of your car, you held up your hand, you pointed a gun, and you shot and killed somebody. As long as you had a moment to think about what you were doing, that's premeditation. Next, so we heard from a couple of people this week. First, we heard from the victim's sister, Erica Thornton. She testified that the victim was a living person. He had a family, he had children, she's known him her entire life. She attended and planned his funeral service. And coupled with that, defense counsel and the prosecution agreed to a stipulation, which just means that they agreed to establish that this victim was a living person who is now deceased. Later on, we heard from Dr. Scantleberry. She was the medical examiner and performed the autopsy. She found that there was a total of 22 gunshot entry wounds, including gunshots to the back torso, front torso, head, neck, upper extremities, and vital organs. She also testified that on the property that was collected from the victim, there was no weapon. And we also heard from Raul Hawkins. He testified that he was head of DOLPH security for years. He was able to identify DOLPH's car in the beginning of the Makitas video, and he was also able to explain the difference between CMG and PRE, their history of conflict, rivalry, diss tracks, and even prior acts of violence that were towards DOLPH. So with all of this testimony, we've established that there was a killing and that the victim was Adolph Thornton Jr. But was that killing unlawful? Was that killing premeditated? And was that killing intentional? Back to Cornelius Smith. In addition to testifying about the agreement that he and the defendant entered into, he also testified about the killing. He said that on the day of the murder, the defendant picked him up from his father's house. They both knew that the victim was doing a turkey drive with several of his PRE artists. They also knew that Big Jook had a hit out on all of the PRE artists. So it was their job that week to find them. And on November 17th, 2021, Cornelius Smith and Justin Johnson were on their way to a turkey drive in Westwood. As they were about to turn the corner, they saw a familiar car cross the intersection, which happened to be DOLPH's car. Cornelius tells us that they followed the car, made a loop onto a back street, and then entered the Makitas parking lot. And this happened, I want to say, about 30 seconds after DOLPH and his brother arrived at Makitas. Cornelius Smith was able to point out himself in that video and the defendant in that video. And he said that both of them were the shooting suspects in that video. The second suspect that got out of the car was wearing a black hoodie, gray pants, black shoes with white soles, and a Bass Pro hat. The same clothing that defendant Justin Johnson was seen in as he was exiting his apartments at the Crosstown Concourse. After the shooting, Cornelius Smith testified that they got into the white Mercedes that they committed the act in. They went to Bradley Street. The defendant parked the white Mercedes on the yard, and they both got into a white Ford Expedition. They both got into that Expedition, and on the way, a couple of calls were made, right? Cornelius tells us that a FaceTime call was made to Big Joe. In that FaceTime call between Big Joe and our defendant spelled out the word DOLPH. And as they were on their way to the Gospel Gardens apartment, the defendant also contacted a few other people who we'll find out later on. So once the defendant and Cornelius Johnson arrived at Gospel Gardens, they received wound care. They change their clothes, and then they go their separate ways. After they go their separate ways, Cornelius Smith tells us that he went to retrieve his phone, and he went to go wipe down the car, the white Mercedes that was parked at Bradley. We also established that it was premeditated. They knew about this hit beforehand, and they committed this hit. So if that wasn't enough for you, we heard from some other people. We heard from Kirsten Gardner. He testified that he was present during the time that the defendant was able to get possession of the white Mercedes that the act was committed in. Kirsten Gardner was at the Valero gas station in the early hours of November 17th, 2021. Next, let me go back to Kirsten Gardner. After he testified that, he told us that he didn't know anything about what was happening the next day, or a few hours after the cars were switched. Similarly, Jamarcus Johnson didn't know anything either. He just knew that he needed a ride. And his brother, Justin Johnson, could provide that for him. So he got his car, the rental car, and he took his cell phone, he fielded his calls, posted on his social media, and checked his emails. After Jamarcus Johnson, we heard from Sergeant Dabney. He was able to tell us about the 4 different bullet casings that were present at the murder scene. .40 caliber, attributable to a handgun. .762, attributable to an assault rifle that Cornelius Smith had. .223, attributable to a semi-automatic that Marcus Gordon probably would have had. And a 9mm casings found inside the store, which could be attributable to the handgun that Marcus Thornton had inside the store. That first one, though, the .40 caliber attributable to a handgun, was in the hand of the suspect with the Bass Pro hat. So, Sergeant Dabney also recovered the surveillance footage from Nikita's and Gospel Gardens, showing this suspect in the same clothing that the defendant was in as he was leaving his apartment at 10:49 a.m. that morning. The timestamps on Gospel Garden and Nikita's coincide with the times defendant's phone accessed those towers. We heard from Special Agent Garner, who summarized that the defendant's phone accessed a tower that provided coverage to the Valero gas station at 3:17 a.m. Around the same time that Kirsten Gardner said that he saw the defendant take possession of that white Mercedes at the Valero gas station. The defendant's phone also accessed towers that provided coverage for the area of 2370 Airways Boulevard, which is our murder scene. And it accessed those towers during the times of the murder, 12:22 p.m. to 12:23 p.m. on November 17th. Officer Garner also explained that the defendant's phone accessed a tower in the area of the 2-lane road in Shelby Drive from 1 p.m. to 1:59 p.m., which is the direct correlation to the surveillance footage of Gospel Gardens and the footage that Officer or Sergeant Dabney identified the defendant being present for. So next, if all of that wasn't enough, we heard testimony from Sergeant Browning. Sergeant Browning said that this defendant's device placed an outgoing call to Anthony Mims at 12:25:40 p.m. on November 17, 2021. Not only did he place an outgoing call to Big Joe, he also received a text from Kiana Hooper, who is his cousin. She texted him an address of 4752 Haven Court. After he received that address, he then sent that address to an associate named Jermaine Sears. Jermaine Sears, or defendant's device, sends the outgoing text to Jermaine Sears that he needs him. And you'll see in the surveillance footage of Haven Court on that day, at that time, a car that is associated with Jermaine Sears arrived shortly after the defendant arrives in a white Ford Expedition. Next, let's just talk about reasonable doubt for one last second. Reasonable doubt, it is not 100% certainty. It is not beyond a shadow of a doubt. It is not beyond all doubt. What's required is moral certainty. Certainty that allows you to sleep well at night. Will you be able to rest easy knowing the decision that you've made? My instinct says yes. And once you've had time to deliberate, I think yours will too. So that brings us to the end. The state has met its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You have all the evidence, all of the testimony, all of the stipulations, all of the videos, all the photographs, and now it's time for you to consider that evidence and apply your common sense. And after you do that, I think, well actually, I expect that you will find this defendant guilty on all charges. Thank you.
Well, that was basically the closing from the other attorney for the state. And it was more a pinpoint thing. The blue being used instead of any other color means it's more positive. So when you think about it, if I told you, man, think of a color right now, got the color, it's either going to be blue, it's either going to be purple, or it's going to be some odd like turquoise, right? Those are the three colors that typically pop up when you do stuff like that. I know, dang, Seti Nash, you just read my mind, right? So there's that. Was it good enough? I don't think so. I think really ultimately the opening was so open and shut that it's difficult to try to beat that. I ain't gonna hold you. The state did they thing as far as the opening and then the shooting itself, the draws, the white car pulling up to the apartment complex. I think that they were great in that. But other than that, there was some doubts. And I'm going to be fair. Y'all can hate the lawyer from the defense side, but he really wasn't that bad. Check it out.
And at Valero, you do see Drowning and Kristen. They're there front and center. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the phone and location. And in the state's argument just now, you heard her saying what the expert said, with a phone using, a tower that could be in the, and he said could be, he said was in the service area of the Valero gas station, or then he said, I didn't do any drive tests, so I can't say what the coverage area would have been, right? And when you're looking at his slides, you've got that really thick PowerPoint exhibit, you'll be able to look at it. And you notice, right, that you're going to notice that the pictures are all really small. They're really zoomed in on the map. And he's talking about, like, this, do you think this is thorough? This is thorough. I mean, he's going through all these calls. Look at what he's doing. I mean, but then you have to ask yourself, well, what happens if you expand the map? And then you realize, and this is the exhibit I entered, you realize he's not even counting all the data and calls, because when you show what he left out at 12:23, right, at the time, immediately after A.L. Thornton Jr. was shot, there are several towers that Mr. Johnson's phone gets off of that are, one's 3 miles away in one direction, the other one is 3.2 miles away down by the Memphis airport. And then he has to go, I left those out. Not a really good explanation for why, right? Important when there are a group of fine people that are looking to find the truth and have to make this decision and need to evaluate the accuracy of what he's telling you. And then you realize that when you talk about coverage areas and where things are in relation to these phones, somebody could be anywhere in a 3-mile radius, either any direction. And then you have to go, what is it? What does it show us? How did that help? How does that make you any more certain of someone's presumed location at a given point in time? Because he said it's not an exact science, and I'm not here to tell you that I can pinpoint where he is. What Cornelius Smith said was, he met with Hernandez Govan and Jook, and Justin Johnson was not there. And then he said he met with Hernandez Govan and others on another occasion to discuss it, and Justin Johnson was not there. So to suggest that he was present and agreed, where's the agreement? He wasn't there. Cornelius Smith, number one, told him. He had to admit, he didn't want to admit it, But he's meeting with the state. He's hoping to get a benefit on his own sentence. He's supposed to be telling the truth. But he's writing his sisters at the exact same time that he's meeting with the government, or the state rather, and telling them, I didn't do this, I'm just lying to get the deal. I'm just lying to get the deal. And it was kind of an interesting moment when he was testifying, because at one point he says, oh, that's not lying, I was gaming. Gaming's not lying. And the unfortunate part of all this is he's gaming everybody, including trying to game y'all. There is no proof whatsoever that Justin Johnson got a penny. Cornelius Smith got 50 grand for a lawyer for killing Adolph Thornton and didn't have to give it back. He didn't have to give it back. His lawyer was in the courtroom. And I asked him, I said, you remember, I said, how could you? You didn't give it back, you grew a conscience. What's going on with you? And he went, well, I did it. Services rendered, right? And the lawyer, he's talking about with his sisters, he's saying, oh, well, my lawyer's telling me to cooperate. I'm walking. I'm not doing it unless I can walk. Now, he was asked by Mr. Hagerman, have I ever told you you're not going to have to go to prison? And he said, no, you haven't. But you have to keep in mind two things, right? At the time he was giving all this information that made him valuable to come in here and talk, he thought he was getting out. That's when those letters were going out. Those letters are going out, and he thinks he's getting out because he's got the lawyer, they got the cooperator from Holly Bobo to walk. And he was asked by Mr. Hagerman, when you killed Adolph Thornton, what did you feel? And like it was nothing, said, I didn't feel anything. Let's try to get paid, right? At one point said, do you find people that he got that Mr. Johnson somehow came back into town and he talked on the phone with him and brought $500, and then some other time some other guy in a Chrysler 300 showed up and provided money to his girlfriend. Well, two things. One, that's not what Mr. Smith originally said to law enforcement. He said that Chrysler 300 came twice, and then Mr. Justin Johnson wasn't anywhere in sight. Well, and what do you know about the Chrysler 300? Jamarcus Johnson, right? Did Jamarcus Johnson say when he was here in front of you, did you ever hear the state ask him, did you deliver the money? As part of you being involved in helping Mr. Johnson, did you deliver money for him? I mean, he asked about the email, or the text rather, about Cornelius emailing Justin's phone and saying, essentially, I need money for the birthday party. That's because Cornelius Smith is lying from start to finish. And then for the first time ever, here in court, he says he wiped the card out. Who's in contact? Who's in contact with Govan? According to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith. Who's not in contact with Govan? Mr. Johnson. Did you hear anything about that? Now, when you go back in the jury room, you're going to be reviewing, obviously, these videos. And one of the things that you have to kind of ask yourself is timing. When you see Mr. Johnson in the elevator with his little girl leaving Crosstown that morning. And of course, you know there's going to be one exhibit that's the reel where the state had on it 11:51 in the morning. And then of course Mr. Hagerman came in, acknowledged the mistake to say that wasn't the right time. And put an officer on the stand, the lieutenant, to talk about getting access to the time, how he got the timestamp. But what that shows you is this. They don't know what time it was that day on that video. They don't know. I mean, mistakes get made. I'm not here to suggest that they don't. But you have to ask yourself, okay, the mistake got made, and then there's a timestamp. Okay, we want to put the timestamp in. That seems like the logical choice. But then you have to listen to the lieutenant, right? And go, Lieutenant, what did you do to check and confirm that these were accurate times? Well, I looked at the live feed when I was in there. I had to have a technician, it's a computer, I don't understand it, but when I was there, I looked up at the screen and it appeared to be the right date and time. But not one person, you didn't hear from anybody that could say, that was confirmed, that's accurate, nothing happened with the system beforehand. And you even heard him say, it is not uncommon at all to pull surveillance cameras that have inaccurate data. That became an issue is about correcting that time. Is when the state realized that I was asking questions of that witness and asking him how long it would take to get from point A to point B to here to here to here. Because when you do the math and it's 11:51, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You know, and all this about Bradley, even the exchange of the Mercedes for the Infiniti, the dropping of the Mercedes at Bradley and picking up the SUV, whether somebody cleaned the Mercedes or didn't, who moved the Mercedes to the backyard, all of that, according to Cornelius Smith, should have been captured on Hernandez Govan's home security system. Right? He said Govan had a security system directly facing Bradley because that's why when he decided that he was going to go wipe the car down, either the day it happened or the day after, he couldn't quite remember, he texted Govan and said he was coming through there because he didn't want Govan to mistake him for somebody trying to come up on him. And there's a lot that you should know that you don't. Because there's a material witness that should have been called by the state that wasn't called. Hernandez Govan. And maybe some of you sat through this and thought, I want to hear what he has to say. And when I told you in the opening statement, I said, it's important, right? For you to weigh out and be able, as part of your duty as jurors, to be able to compare those two testimonies together. I'm sure some of you were thinking, yeah, that would make sense. I know we talked about that in voir dire, about getting two people to talk to kind of differentiate. You know, some of you that might have been a teacher, talking about that is one of the ways that you try to figure out who's telling the truth, who isn't. But you weren't able to do that. You weren't able to do that. You were deprived of that. And to be clear, as you heard about Hernandez Govan, he was cooperating in this investigation. He met with law enforcement on at least 2 occasions pursuant to a proffer agreement, which meant he was allowed to go in and give information and not have his words used against him later. I don't have the ability to make good on a proffer letter. Only the state does. And the law states that it creates an inference that the testimony of that witness, Govan, would have been unfavorable to the state. Now, it's up to you to decide whether or not he was unavailable, a material witness, and whether or not there should be the inference. But you're allowed to make that inference in here. And unfavorable, I would tell you, unfavorable to the state means favorable to Mr. Johnson. And knowing that, can you really render a verdict of guilty and have your mind rest easy? And not walk away and go, I just don't know if I did the right thing. knowing that there was information out there that could have been presented to you and wasn't.
Now, if you're being fair, did he create doubt? Just asking you. I'm not gonna give you my thoughts on it, because I want you to see the final closing words for the against/for straight drop, because at the end of the day, the state has the final say so. So, did he close it out? Well, you be the judge of that.
Just one minute. Just one minute. You too real. DOLPH, you too real. He rapped about what he calls come up. What he saw in neighborhoods, what he saw in his family, growing up. Too real. He rapped about people that he had a rivalry with. Too real. DOLPH, too real. Included disses of dangerous people like Big Chuck. You too real. Too real. Too real. Last moments of his life, last seconds of his life. How long was the videotape? 30 seconds? You're too real. Dies on the floor in the neighborhood cookie store in Orange Mound. It's real. You're too real. Your family misses you. Erica and Mia and the kids. You too real. This is real. This is too real. And when the killer, 1 to 2, is caught on video, all the times, we even watch him get on down, it's time for us to be real. And we don't need Memphis talk for that. It's called just do what's right. It's as simple as that. Just do what's right. Cornelius Smith and Justin Johnson killed Adolph Floyd Jr. November 17th. We watched it happen. Cornelius Smith, Justin Johnson, Hernandez, Govan, Big Chuck, they all conspired to have it done, and it was done. November 17th, 2021. And as he did it, he was already a convicted felon. He should be found guilty of all counts. We do what's right. That's how we do. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, murder in the first degree, and convicted felon in possession of a handgun.
Now, one of the best things that he did was he did create reasonable doubt. Whether or not y'all believe it or not, that's a whole different thing. I want y'all to look at it in this way, if you can. If not, just say, you know what, I can't do a Steady Nash, it's Dolph, man. What if this wasn't young Dolph, and this is some cat that your family was beefing with, and your cousin happened to do this, and you looked at all the evidence that they have, no murder weapon. Yeah, the cell phone was around, but as much as we thought before, cell phone technology actually does not pinpoint it like we thought. Just gonna be fair, square, obvious, and honest. So in his closing, he didn't do a bad job. He didn't. It's not A+ material, but he did create doubt. And anybody who disagrees with that, I'm asking you, before you disagree with that, are you checking your bias? Are you? But that statement about reasonable doubt and what we particularly thought it was, that's ultimately the nail in the coffin. It just is. Because at the end of the day, that's what we have. This is possibly, I hate to say it this way, one of the dumbest jobs ever done. When it seems as though the state is throwing shit on the wall and trying to make it stick, cool. But here's where the defense fucked up at. Y'all didn't really press too much on the brother to make it seem as though Justin Johnson was already headed out. I'm going to be fair. I don't think the brother had anything to do with this. And the defense pointed out, bro, where the F is the money? If the brother was supposed to cop the money and do all of this stuff, then what? I think the state just came through at Hernandez-Govan and the brother and just threw a shit ton of accusations at him and basically was like, yeah, we got you. That's what I ultimately think happened. I think that's what happened because when you're looking at Jamarcus Johnson, bro, I'm not saying he ain't no thug or nothing like that. And you can believe he's a thug or believe he's not a thug. I don't think they made the case against him for anything. I really think his brother set his ass up. So ultimately, did he really snitch on his brother? No. Do I think he a street nigga? No. Do I think he owed his brother any loyalty? No. You put me in this shit. You took advantage of me knowing I needed a car. You gave me a car that you knew was hot. And you gave me your cell phone and basically told me to post on your behalf you about to go out of town. Now, some of y'all will take it and say, come on, bruh. He knew. His brother knew. Not really if we're looking at the dates because ultimately Justin Johnson knew they were coming. And that was that. Now, you can say, aiding and abetting after, you can effort a little bit and say, well, since his brother knew where the hell he was and was in contact with him, he was supposed to contact the authorities. I don't have any rebuttal there. So if that's what they're going with, then cool. But they said it was 7 counts. 7. Siete way. So there's that. I can see that. If you make that case, you got me. Hands up. Don't shoot. You got me, partner. With the Govan Hernandez stuff, it seemed like the only nigga who got paid from this was Cornbread. Now, they try to say, hey, it was cameras and all this stuff and everything like that. I don't believe there was no cameras. I have no idea. I think what happens is, what a lot of people don't know is, if you put like an ADT sign or this house is protected by this, do you know that reduces the chances of your house being broken into by 50%? Because they believe you have an alarm system and nobody wants to take that chance. So you have that added with, y'all got the name wrong and they referred to him as Unc, and $800 for what exactly? Here's a crazier theory. What if Big Juke and Govan Hernandez were meeting, kicking it, Govan trying to set it up with straight drop. Hey, I got this artist and stuff like that, man. He one of the hottest out of the city, bro. You know, put him on. You know, he doing his rap thing and all this stuff and everything like that. And Cornbread ass managed to go up over there with the homie that he had and pick up some pills. And at the same time, that's when he met Big Juke. While Big Juke was there and all this stuff and everything like that. And what if Cornbread was ultimately the one who got in contact with Big Juke over there? If that happened, then really is that Govan Hernandez's fault? Is it? These are just theories because you can meet people and not know anything. We done all had that cousin that had met one of our homegirls and we didn't even know they was hunching. No idea. And then they ended up pregnant and now they got a domestic and you sitting here like, bro, where the hell was I at? Oh, they met at my party? Now, if you don't want to believe that, don't believe it. I'm not telling y'all what to believe. I'm just bouncing off theories because, remember, the defense said, oh, I suspect you're going to hear from Cornbread, from Jamarcus Johnson, and you're going to hear from Hernandez Govan. Then he switched it and said, oh, it's a proffer. He told him a bunch of stuff. What did he tell him specifically? Because it just looked like basic cop work. That's what it looked like. Basic cop work. Hey, check cell phones, check towers, check social media, check cameras. There you go. That's all the case ultimately revealed. But when it boils down to it, in about 20, 30 years, when these cats are getting old, looking stupid in the face, what the hell did y'all think was going to happen? Now, in Memphis, there are some cats who get killed. There are unsolved murders. But when y'all kill a somebody, a real somebody, then it don't work. And I ain't gonna hold you. On Saturday, I'm gonna put out a video on the theory of the RICO that I keep seeing a bunch of videos about. And I'm gonna let y'all honestly know if I think there is a chance for a RICO or there's not a chance for a RICO, because there's certain details that need to be added and there's certain details that need to be subtracted from what I'm seeing in people's titles. I'm not going to click on videos. I'll watch the videos sometimes this weekend because I don't want to take anybody's theory and then run with it or anything like that. I don't want to take what anybody says and run with it or anything like that. I ain't been talking to nobody about my videos, and I'm pretty sure y'all can tell from my coverage, I ain't tapping in with nobody. I want them to have their perspective. I don't want to influence them, and I don't want them to influence me. It just is what it is. Subscribe, turn on the bell, stay notified, and share to keep your people aware. But it's over.